My mother told me to stop making everything about me when I asked for a simple birthday dinner. I walked out that night and didn't look back. 10 years later, my success became the one thing they couldn't stand, and I used it to set a trap that would expose their envy for all to see. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was 22, fragile and desperately trying to find my footing. It had been 3 months since I'd graduated from college with a degree in computer science, a mountain of student debt, and a resume I'd sent out over 80 times without a single callback. I was living in a tiny, damp studio apartment above a laundromat, surviving on instant noodles and the dwindling fumes of my optimism. It was Tuesday, October 12th, my birthday. I didn't expect a party. I didn't expect gifts. My family wasn't like that, at least not with me. My older brother, Leo, was the golden child, the one for whom celebrations were mandatory. My birthdays were usually an afterthought, a quick, happy birthday text from my father, Frank, and a polite, critical email from my mother, Margaret, asking if I'd sorted out my job situation yet. But this year, I was feeling the chill of the world a little too keenly. I just wanted to feel, for one night, like I was part of a family. I called my mother around noon. My hands were shaking, which was ridiculous. Why was I so nervous? "Hello, Lauren," she answered, her voice clipped and professional. My mother was a high-level administrator at the local university, and she never fully shed her dean of students persona, especially not with me. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to sound breezy. "I know it's last minute, but it's my birthday. I was wondering if maybe we could all go out for dinner. Just somewhere casual." "My treat, of course," I added quickly, though I only had about $60 in my checking account. There was a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line. I could picture her perfectly, sitting at her large mahogany desk, pinching the bridge of her nose, annoyed by the interruption. "Lauren, you know how busy this semester is for me," she said. "And your brother is actually coming over tonight. We're celebrating his promotion." "Of course." Leo. 2 years older than me, Leo worked in finance, a vague but impressive-sounding field that, as far as I could tell, involved him wearing expensive suits and constantly borrowing money from our parents. "Oh," I said, my voice small. "A promotion? That's great. Well, I could just come over. I'd love to celebrate with him. We could just, celebrate both." The silence that followed was worse than the sigh. It was cold and sharp. "Lauren," she finally said, her voice dripping with an exasperation that was intimately familiar to me. "Stop making everything about you. It's Leo's night. He's achieved something significant. You just graduated. Can't you let him have this moment without trying to steal the spotlight?" The words hit me harder than a physical slap. I felt the air leave my lungs, a hot, stinging shame rising in my throat. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I was just empty. I was lonely. I wanted to see my family on my birthday. I wasn't, I whispered. I just wanted. "I have to go," she cut me off. "We'll talk about your job search this weekend. Maybe I can get Frank to look over your resume again. It's clearly not working." The line clicked dead. I sat there in my tiny apartment, the smell of dryer sheets wafting up from below, and I just broke. It wasn't one thing, it was the lifetime of it. It was every school play she'd missed because Leo had a soccer game. It was every A I brought home that was met with a nod, while his C+ was celebrated with a steak dinner for trying so hard. It was the casual, constant erosion of my worth. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to their house. I hadn't been invited, but I didn't care. I needed to see their faces when they said it. I walked in without knocking. They were all in the dining room, the table set with the good china. My father, Frank, was at the head, looking vaguely uncomfortable as he always did. My mother was beaming at Leo, raising a glass of wine. A large "Congratulations, Leo" banner was strung across the wall. They all froze when they saw me. "Lauren," my mother said, her smile vanishing, her eyes turning to ice. "I told you we were busy." "It's my birthday," I said, and I hated how my voice trembled. Leo laughed. He actually laughed. "Wow, someone's desperate for attention. What are you, 12? I looked at my father. He just stared at his plate, tracing the pattern with his fork. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Stop making everything about you, my mother repeated, her voice low and dangerous. I looked at the three of them, my mother, the queen, my brother, the prince, my father, the silent courtier, and I realized with a sudden, devastating clarity that I wasn't just the afterthought. I was the audience. I was the unpaying guest at a show that had been running my whole life. "You're right," I said, my voice suddenly steady. The shaking had stopped. "I'm done." I turned around, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. I got in my rusty sedan, drove to a 24-hour diner, and ordered a slice of cherry pie. As I ate it alone under the fluorescent lights, I cried for the last time over them. That night, I learned that in my own family, I was an inconvenience. The first week of silence was suffocating. I kept checking my phone, my body tensed for the inevitable text from my father asking me to be the bigger person, or the email from my mother listing my disrespectful and melodramatic behavior. But there was nothing. Just a heavy, profound void that confirmed what I already knew. I had walked out, and they hadn't even bothered to see if I'd fallen. The only person who did call was Leo, 3 days later. His voice was smug. "So, Mom's pretty upset," he said, clearly enjoying himself. "She said you really embarrassed yourself. You should probably apologize if you ever want that job help she offered." I hung up the phone. I felt a new kind of cold settle into my bones, but it wasn't sadness. It was resolve. I was 22, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. That loneliness became my fuel. I stopped waiting for callbacks and started building. My tiny studio apartment, once a symbol of my failure, became my fortress. I ate, slept, and breathed code. The project I'd tinkered with in college, a simple organizational app, I tore it down and started rebuilding it from scratch, fueled by sleepless nights and cheap coffee. I was invisible to my family, so I decided to build a world where I was the architect. About a month after the birthday incident, my mother finally called. I stared at her name on the screen, my heart hammering. I almost didn't answer, but some old, frayed thread of duty compelled me. "Lauren," she began, no hello, no how are you. "I'm looking at your father's credit card statement. Did you place an order at Techware for $300? I blinked. "Yes," I said. "I bought a new processor. My laptop was too slow to run the compilers I need." "With our money." She snapped. "It was the emergency card you gave me for college," I said, my voice flat. "For books and, emergencies, I'm building a portfolio, Mom. It's for my career." "That's not what an emergency card is for, Lauren. That's for a flat tire. You are being incredibly irresponsible. Your brother, even with his new responsibilities, is very careful about asking us for help." I nearly laughed. Leo, who I knew was still on their car insurance and phone plan. "I'll pay you back as soon as I can," I said. "You'll pay it back by Friday," she retorted. "Frank and I are not a bank for your little hobbies. Honestly, I don't know why you're building things when you should be taking a job as a receptionist. You have to start at the bottom." That was the moment, the final click. "You're right," I said, my voice calm. "You're not a bank. Goodbye, Mom." I hung up, blocked her number, blocked Leo's, and even blocked my father's. I knew he wouldn't call, but it was symbolic. I was severing the limb. That same day, I went to my bank and opened the one account my parents had no access to. My paternal grandmother, a quiet, kind woman who had passed away when I was 18, had always seen me. While my parents doted on Leo, she would sit with me, asking about my computer ideas. She had left me a small inheritance in a trust that I gained access to at 21, $10,000. My parents knew about it, and my mother had already drawn up a very sensible plan for how I should use it as a down payment on a small condo, which she would, of course, help me manage. I looked at that balance, $10,000. It was all I had. My mother's voice echoed in my head, irresponsible, hobbies. I transferred every cent into my checking account. It wasn't just my inheritance, it was my escape hatch. It was the seed. As I walked out of the bank, a single, recurring thought cemented itself in my mind, a line of code in my own brain. They had forgotten about Grandma. They had forgotten about the one person who had ever invested in me, and I would spend the next 10 years making sure they never forgot again. I didn't just walk out of their house that night, I walked out of their entire narrative, and I was about to write my own. To understand my mother, Margaret, you have to understand her obsession with appearances. She was the administrator of a prestigious university department, but she behaved as if she were a duchess. Her entire world was built on the shaky foundation of what other people think. Our house was immaculate but cold. Our family photos were professionally staged. Everything was for an audience. My father, Frank, a quiet accountant, was her perfect accessory. He was stable, predictable, and, most importantly, invisible. He was the silent partner in her performance, content to live in the shadow she cast as long as it was peaceful. And then there was Leo. Leo was my mother's masterpiece. He was tall, handsome, and had a charm that could disarm anyone for about 10 minutes. He was the perfect son for a woman like Margaret. He looked good in a suit, had a firm handshake, and talked vaguely about portfolios and markets. My mother poured every resource into him. He got the best tutors, the new car, the financed apartment downtown. His finance job was, I was fairly certain, something she had pulled strings to get through a university donor. My path, on the other hand, was a constant source of quiet embarrassment for her. I was the tinkerer. I was the quiet girl with paint on her jeans who preferred a soldering iron to a sorority. My passion for computer science was unladylike and niche. She'd pushed me toward marketing or communications, something presentable. When I got a full scholarship to the state university for my CS program, she was almost disappointed. It wasn't the Ivy League school she'd wanted to name drop at cocktail parties. My entire life, I had been the support crew for the Leo show. My part-time job in college, that was to pay for my own books so their money could go to Leo's networking dinners. The sacrifices were never spoken of, but they were concrete. I was the one who had to be understanding when my 21st birthday was skipped because Leo really needed a weekend trip to de-stress from his midterms. I was the one who had to be mature and not complain. My mother's antagonism wasn't loud or aggressive. It was the insidious, quiet kind. It was the constant, subtle reinforcement that my needs were secondary. Leo's desires were needs, my needs were demands. My brother, in turn, internalized this completely. He wasn't just the golden child, he was entitled. He saw me as a minor character in his own story. He was arrogant, lazy, and utterly insulated from the consequences of his own actions by our mother's relentless protection. She wasn't just nurturing him, she was enabling a parasite. My father, Frank, his was a sin of omission. He saw it all. He saw the inequity, the casual cruelty of my mother's words, the smugness of my brother. But Frank's defining characteristic was his desperate, suffocating need for a quiet life. He would rather let his daughter be emotionally steamrolled than endure one of Margaret's cold shoulders or a single night of her pointed, icy silence. His silence wasn't peace, it was cowardice. And that cowardice was the soil in which my mother's and brother's entitlement grew like toxic weeds. After I cut them off, I felt the phantom limb of their expectations for months. I'd wake up feeling guilty, my hand reaching for the phone to apologize. To do what I'd always done, smooth things over, make myself small, and restore the peace that my father craved and my mother demanded. But then I would remember her voice. Stop making everything about you, and the guilt would harden back into resolve. They hadn't just dismissed my birthday, they had dismissed my entire existence as an inconvenience. The $10,000 from my grandmother was my declaration of independence. I didn't spend it on a new apartment or a car. I invested it in my company, which, for the first year, was just me in my tiny studio. I incorporated Lighthouse Logic, a name inspired by the only person who had ever been a beacon for me. I lived on less than nothing, coding 18 hours a day, teaching myself business management from library books, and taking on freelance web design gigs to pay for my instant noodles. My family, I learned through the grapevine, told people I was having a difficult time and needed space. The truth was, I had never in my entire life felt more sane. The shift from victim to strategist wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, grueling metamorphosis over 10 years. The first 3 years were the hardest. I was completely isolated. I poured my grandmother's $10,000 into server space, legal incorporation fees, and a bare-bones marketing plan for my app, a sophisticated, AI-driven project management tool I called Nexus. I lived like a ghost, haunted by the fear of failure. There were moments when I would have crawled back to my family for a single warm meal, but the memory of my mother's disdain was a wall I couldn't climb down. My first break came not from an investor, but from a small tech blog that reviewed Nexus. The reviewer called it the most intuitive and powerful organizational tool of the year. That single review opened a small door. A mid-level tech company in Austin reached out, not to invest, but to buy a 500-seat license. That check was the first real money I'd ever earned. It was enough to move out of the studio apartment, rent a tiny 2-room office, and hire my first employee, a brilliant young coder named Ben. For the next 7 years, I didn't just work. I waged a one-woman war against the narrative my family had written for me. I was the difficult one, the unstable one, the failure. So I would become, by sheer force of will, the most stable, successful, and undeniable person they had ever known. Nexus grew. We secured a round of angel investing, then a Series A. By the time I was 31, Lighthouse Logic was a name whispered in tech circles. We were courted by the giants. I was living in Austin, a world away from my family's suffocating orbit in the Northeast. I had a beautiful condo, a team I respected, and a life I had built with my own 2 hands. I hadn't spoken to my mother, father, or brother in almost a decade, and then the past came knocking. It started with a LinkedIn request from a cousin, then an email from an old family friend. "Your mother misses you," one read. "Your family is so proud of you," said another. I ignored them all. Then came the magazine. A prominent business journal was doing a 30 under 35 feature on tech entrepreneurs. They chose me for the cover. It was a glossy, high-definition portrait of a life my family couldn't comprehend. I knew they would see it. My clever trap wasn't something I had to set, it was something I had become. My success was the leverage. My independence was the weapon. They had thrived on my smallness, on my need for their approval. Now, I had an approval rating from the entire industry. My father was the first to try. A hesitant email, not from his work address, but from a new personal one. "Lauren," it read, "I saw the magazine. Your grandmother would be so proud. We are so proud. We'd love to see you. Mom and Leo send their love." I felt a flicker of the old ache, but it died quickly. "We are so proud. Mom and Leo send their love." It was a lie, wrapped in the passive, pleasant language of my father, but it wasn't enough to just ignore them. I needed to understand what was happening. My success was the light. I just needed to see what it illuminated. I hired a private investigator. It felt melodramatic, but my gut, honed by years of surviving on my own, told me something was wrong. "I want you to look into my brother, Leo," I told the pie, "and his connection to my parents, Frank and Margaret." I wasn't just a struggling graduate anymore. I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I could afford to find the truth. The results came back in less than a week, and they were staggering. My clever trap suddenly had teeth. The pie found that Leo's finance career was a house of cards. He'd been fired from his university donor job 3 years prior for client mismanagement. He'd been living off our parents ever since, racking up enormous debts under the guise of starting his own consultancy. Worse, my father, Frank, had co-signed on a business loan for $250,000, using their house, my childhood home, as collateral. A balloon payment was due in 6 months, and Leo, predictably, had squandered the money on a flashy car, a high-rise apartment, and a series of investments that had evaporated. They weren't just proud. They were desperate. My success hadn't just made them envious, it had made me a target. I was no longer the inconvenient daughter. I was the lifeboat. The call came 2 days after I received the pie's report. This time, it was my mother. I was in a board meeting and her name flashed on my phone, a number I hadn't blocked but one that had been silent for a decade. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. "Lauren, darling," her voice began, syrupy and unfamiliar. "It's your mother. I've just been thinking about you so much. My heart is just so full seeing what you've become, all that hard work. We just knew you had it in you." Bile rose in my throat. We knew. "Listen, darling," she continued, "I know we had our silly disagreements, but you're my daughter and I love you. We are having a small dinner party this Saturday to celebrate Frank's 60th birthday. It would mean the world to him, to us, if you would come. Please, Lauren, it's time to let bygones be bygones." The silly disagreements. My entire erasure from the family reduced to a petty spat. And using my father's birthday as the bait, it was classic Margaret. I stared at the Pi's report on my desk. The $250,000 loan, the impending due date, this wasn't an olive branch, it was a summons. I called her back that evening. "Mom," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. "Lauren, oh, you got my message," she gushed, the warmth so fake it felt cold. "I did, a dinner party sounds lovely." "Wonderful," she breathed a little too quickly. "We're so excited to see you. We'll finally get to celebrate you properly." "I'll be there," I said. "I'll fly in Saturday morning." I hung up and booked a flight, a hotel, and a consultation with my corporate lawyer. I wasn't just walking into a dinner, I was walking into a negotiation. When I arrived at my childhood home, it was exactly as I remembered, only slightly more worn. My father opened the door. He looked older, his face lined with a stress that went beyond age. "Lauren," he whispered, and his eyes weltered with genuine tears. He reached out to hug me, and I let him, though I remained stiff. It was the hug of a stranger. "Hello, Dad," I said. My mother swept in, pulling me from his grasp into a cloud of expensive perfume. "There she is, our superstar," she exclaimed, holding me at arm's length. "Look at you, that suit must be custom, you look expensive." It was meant as a compliment, but it landed like an appraisal. Leo was in the living room, swirling a glass of whiskey. He looked heavier, softer, and his eyes were sharp with a jealousy so raw it was startling. "Well, well," he said, not standing. "The prodigal daughter returns. Finally decided to grace us with your presence, huh?" "Hello, Leo," I said, taking a seat opposite him. "I see you're still comfortable." My mother shot me a warning look, then plastered her smile back on. "Dinner is almost ready. Let's not talk about boring things. Let's talk about that magazine. A cover, Lauren. Frank, did you ever imagine?" My father just shook his head, looking at me with a bewildered awe. The dinner was a performance. My mother guided the conversation, painting a picture of a close, supportive family that had always championed my unique talents. Leo drank too much, making increasingly snide remarks. "Must be nice," he said halfway through the main course. "Sitting up in your glass tower, playing with your little app. Some of us have to work in the real world." "Is that what you call it, Leo?" I asked, setting my fork down. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped. "I'm just curious," I said, my voice light. "Your consultancy. How's business? I hear the market is tough." My mother's smile froze. "Lauren, don't be rude." "I'm not. I'm just making conversation, like you wanted, Mom." I turned my gaze to her. "In fact, I'm glad you invited me. I was hoping to discuss some business." This was it. The air in the room crackled. "Oh," my mother said, her eyes narrowing. "Leo," I said, "I know about the $250,000 loan, the one you took out using this house as collateral, and I know the balloon payment is due in 4 months." My father's face went ashen. Leo dropped his fork. My mother's mask of supportive matriarch didn't just crack, it shattered. Her face contorted into a snarl I hadn't seen in 10 years, but recognized instantly. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you spy on this family?" "It's called due diligence," I said calmly. "You didn't invite me here to celebrate Ad's birthday, Mom. You invited me here to bail you out." You ungrateful," Leo sputtered, his face a blotchy red. "After everything we did for you." "Everything you did for me?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "What precisely was that? Was it on my birthday when I was 22 and alone, and Mom told me to stop making everything about me?" "We were celebrating your brother's promotion," my mother shrieked, her voice rising. "A promotion at a job he was fired from a year later?" I countered. My mother's mouth opened and closed. She looked at Leo, then at Frank, her composure gone. "You're lying," Leo shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You're trying to ruin me." "I don't have to ruin you, Leo," I said, standing up. "You've done a spectacular job of that all on your own. You're not a consultant, you're a fraud. And you, Mom, you're his enabler, and Dad, you're just the bank." I looked at the three of them, their faces a mixture of shock, fury, and in my father's case, profound, gut-wrenching shame. "The superstar is leaving," I said, picking up my purse. "Don't call me again unless you're ready to tell the truth, and just so we're clear, I'm not giving you a single cent." I walked out of that house for the second time, but this time, I wasn't the one who was shaking. The fallout was immediate and nuclear. I was on the plane back to Austin when the barrage began. My mother, having recovered from her shock, had moved on to her next tactic, righteous indignation. She left me a string of voicemails, each more hysterical than the last. I was cold, cruel, and disgusting. I had broken my father's heart. I was trying to destroy the family out of petty jealousy for Leo's success. It was a stunning display of projection. Leo, meanwhile, tried a different approach. He sent a single, rambling text that was part threat, part plea. He accused me of hacking his finances and threatened to sue me for slander. In the very next sentence, he begged me to just be a sister and help him out, promising to pay me back double once his new venture took off. It was the frantic flailing of a man who had never faced a single consequence. I ignored them both. Instead, I called my pie again. I want everything, I said. Leo's consultancy, I want to know who he took money from. I want to know the full extent of his client mismanagement from his last job. I want to know everything. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, advised me to prepare for the worst. They're desperate, Lauren. Desperate people do desperate things. This loan isn't just a mistake, it's their entire future. They're going to try and pin this on you, smear you, or force your hand. She was right. My mother escalated. She began a targeted campaign, calling extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. She painted a picture of a loving family worried sick about their troubled daughter. She told them I'd become obsessed with money and delusionally paranoid, and that I'd threatened to let my own parents become homeless out of spite. This was her true talent, narrative warfare. I was, once again, the difficult one, but I wasn't 22 anymore. I had resources. The pie's full report was devastating. Leo wasn't just in debt, he was a con artist. His consultancy had taken investment money from at least 3 other people, all of them elderly acquaintances of our parents. He wasn't just being investigated for mismanagement, he was on the verge of being charged with felony fraud. The $250,000 from our parents was just the money he'd used to cover his tracks after the first few victims started asking questions. This was so much bigger than a family loan. He had committed serious crimes, and my mother, I was certain, knew. She wasn't just enabling, she was an accomplice. The second confrontation happened at my hotel. I had stayed in town, a fact I knew would get back to them. I was in the lobby cafe with my lawyer, Sarah, going over the documents when they stormed in. Margaret, Leo, and trailing behind them my father, Frank. "There you are," my mother yelled, causing the entire lobby to turn. "Hiding in a hotel, you won't even answer your family's calls." "I'm in a meeting, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her drama. "This is my lawyer, Sarah." Sarah, unfazed, simply nodded. "Mrs. Margaret." "I don't care who she is," Leo snarled, jabbing a finger at me. "You are going to fix this. You're going to call the bank, you're going to pay off the loan, and you're going to stop these lies." "What lies, Leo?" I asked. "The $80,000 you took from the Hendersons, your old neighbors, or the $50,000 from Mom's college roommate? Was that for your new venture, too?" Leo's face went white. My mother visibly recoiled. She hadn't known I'd found that, but it was my father's reaction that stopped me. He looked at Leo, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. "Leo," he whispered, "the Hendersons, but you said that was a service fee." "Shut up, Dad," Leo hissed. "You don't know what you're talking about." "He doesn't, does he?" I said, standing up to face them. I held up the file the pie had given me. "Here is the irrefutable proof. Wire transfers, bank statements, even emails." "You haven't just been lying to me, Leo. You've been lying to everyone. You've been stealing from old people. And you, Mom, you've been helping him hide it." "That's not true," she cried, but her voice was hollow. "You're an accessory, Mom. You've been laundering his reputation your entire life, and now you're actively covering up his crimes. You didn't bring me here to save the house. You brought me here to pay off his victims before they go to the police." My mother stared at the file in my hand as if it were a bomb. Leo was trembling, his mask of arrogance completely gone, revealing the terrified, weak man underneath. I turned to my father. He was staring at the floor, his entire body shaking. He looked up at me, his face a mask of utter devastation. "Frank," my mother said, her voice a desperate plea. Tell her she's wrong." My father looked at his wife, then at his son, and then at me, and in his eyes I saw the spell finally, agonizingly break, the spell of peace at all costs. He saw the price of his silence, and it was his own soul. He didn't say a word. He just turned, pushed past the hotel's revolving door, and walked out into the street, a man finally broken by the truth. The event my mother had been planning for months was my father's 60th birthday party. Of course, it was never really for my father. It was for her. It was a grand affair at a local country club, a way for Margaret to perform her role as the successful, beloved matriarch. After the disastrous confrontation at the hotel, I was certain it would be canceled. But I had underestimated my mother's pathological need for public validation. The party was still on. My father, I learned from a cousin, had been convinced to attend. The family, she said, was working through a difficult time. I was not invited, but I knew I had to be there. This wasn't a revenge anymore. It was about a public reckoning. It was about the truth finally having its moment, out loud, in the world my mother cared about most. I arrived just as the speeches were beginning. I walked into the ballroom, and a hush fell over the crowd of university colleagues, old family friends, and the few remaining relatives who hadn't been completely alienated. My mother was at the podium, a champagne flute in her hand. She was in the middle of a glowing speech about family loyalty and weathering storms. When she saw me, her face paled, but her grip on the microphone tightened. "Lauren," she said, her voice straining to sound welcoming. "What?" "Surprise, we weren't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't," I said, walking calmly toward the front of the room. Leo, sitting at the head table, jumped to his feet. "You're not welcome here, get her out." "What's the matter, Leo?" I called out, my voice clear and strong in the silent room. "Afraid I'll make it all about me?" I turned to the guests. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Lauren, the daughter you've all been hearing so much about. The difficult one." "Lauren, stop this," my mother hissed, her eyes darting to her colleagues. "You are making a scene." "I learned from the best, Mom," I said. I looked at my father, who was sitting at the table, staring at his hands, a man hollowed out. "You're all here to celebrate my father's 60th birthday," I said to the crowd. "And my mother is right. Family is about weathering storms. But she and my brother are the storm. For the last 10 years, my mother has told you all that I was unstable. The truth is, I was just the first one to walk away from their lies." "She's drunk," Leo shouted. "She's hysterical." "Am I?" I said. I held up a thick manila envelope. "Then you won't mind if I share my delusions with your investors." I looked pointedly at the Hendersons, an elderly couple sitting near the front. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I was so sorry to hear about the $80,000 you invested with Leo. I have the bank statements here. I'm afraid it didn't go into a tech fund. It went to a down payment on his Porsche." Mrs. Henderson's hand flew to her mouth. My mother looked like she was going to faint. "And Mom," I continued, "you've done a wonderful job protecting this family, especially protecting Leo from the consequences of his fraud. You've been covering for him for years. But the $250,000 loan you took out on your house, the one you called me to pay off, that wasn't just a bad investment. That was to silence his other victims. You're not just an enabler, Mom, you're an accomplice to fraud." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. My mother stood frozen, her mask of civility utterly demolished. I walked to the head table and placed the envelope in front of my father. "Dad," I said, my voice softening for the first time, "this is everything, all the proof, all the lies you've been forced to live with. Your peace has cost these people their life savings. It cost me my childhood. And it's about to cost you your home. Is it worth it?" This was his moment. My mother and brother stared at him, their eyes burning with desperation. The whole room was watching. Frank looked at the envelope. He looked at Margaret, her face a rictus of terror. He looked at Leo, who was a whimpering, cornered animal. Then my father did something I had never seen him do. He stood up, his back straight. He picked up the envelope, not to hide it, but to hold it. He looked at his wife, and his voice, when it came, was not a whisper. It was a judgment. "No more, Margaret," he said. He turned to the crowd. "My daughter," he said, his voice shaking but clear, "is telling the truth, all of it." He then looked at Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. I will make this right, I promise you." That was the triumphant action. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, and it was devastating. My mother let out a small, strangled cry. Leo just collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. The performance was over. My father, the silent enabler, had finally broken free and brought the entire house of cards down with him. I turned around and walked out of the room, leaving the chaos and the whispers behind me. The downfall was swift and total. My father's public admission was the domino that toppled everything. The Hendersons and the other victims, now armed with my father's confirmation and my pie's evidence, went to the authorities. Leo was arrested within the week. The investigation unraveled his entire pathetic web of deceit. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud and theft by deception. My mother's fate was, in some ways, worse. She wasn't charged, as my father and her lawyers managed to frame her as another one of Leo's dupes, a deluded mother who simply couldn't see the truth. But in the world she cherished, she was finished. Her university, facing a massive public scandal, strongly suggested she take an early retirement. She was socially exiled. The friends she had cultivated for decades wanted nothing to do with the mother of a con man. My father, Frank, was true to his word. He liquidated everything. He sold the house, the collateral for Leo's loan, and used the proceeds, along with his entire retirement savings, to pay back every cent to the Hendersons and the other victims. He divorced my mother. I didn't see him for almost 6 months. Leo was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a light sentence he received only because my father had made full restitution. My mother moved into a small, sterile condo across town, her grand performance finally over, with no audience left to watch. I was in Austin, preparing for a new product launch when my father called me. "Lauren," he said, his voice was different, lighter. "I'm in Austin. I was hoping I could buy you a coffee. If you're not too busy." We met at a small cafe near my office. He was thinner and he looked his age, but his eyes were clear for the first time. He wasn't hiding. We sat in silence for a few minutes. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice thick. It's not enough, I know. Sorry doesn't fix a single thing. It doesn't give you back your birthdays. It doesn't make up for the silence." I just nodded, letting him speak. "I was a coward, Lauren," he said, looking me right in the eye. "I was so afraid of her anger, I don't know, of the noise. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was just letting her and Leo feed on you, and on me. I'm so sorry." He cried then, a quiet, broken sob into his hands, and the last, cold knot of anger in my chest finally dissolved. I didn't see an enabler, I just saw my dad. "I know," I said. "Thank you for paying them back, Dad. That was the right thing to do." "It was the only thing to do," he said, wiping his eyes. That was the beginning of our reconciliation. It was slow and cautious. He got a small accounting job in Austin, living in a simple apartment. We had coffee, then dinner. I learned about him and he learned about me, not as the superstar or the difficult daughter, but as Lauren. I used my resources to ensure justice was served, but not in the way my mother had feared. I didn't fund Leo's prosecution, I funded his victims' recovery. My company, Lighthouse Logic, established a community fund to help victims of elder financial fraud, with the first donation made in my grandmother's name. The last I heard, my mother was volunteering at a local library, a quiet, bitter woman. Leo was up for parole, but I had no intention of seeing him. My father and I were building something new. It's not the family I lost, because that family was never real. It's something fragile but honest. I found my peace not in their downfall, but in my own vindication. I walked out of that house at 22 feeling like an inconvenience. Now, I knew the truth. I was never the one who was making it all about me. I was just the only one who wasn't.